Good morning and welcome to Morning Coffee with Brigid. I, of course, am Brigid Burke, and this is, we up to Friday now. We are Friday the 17th of May. And I'm literally just starting my second cup. I woke up actually went to bed well, I guess maybe not that early, but I woke up quite late again today. So I had to, and good morning. I woke up quite a little bit late, and when I wake up, I usually feel like I feel weighted down. It's like everything, you know how it is at night. If you have any kind of allergies or if anything's going on, it's like everything just kind of goes to your head, and then when you go to get up, you just feel like you're trying to lift a rock up off the bed. That was kind of me this morning. I had talked a couple days ago about the Rouhani healing that I had been through, and it's really interesting. One of the topics I want to talk about today is grounding, and as people who know me from the other, they know that I work very heavily with catonic type energy. So working with the celestials is a little different, and I think there's almost a perception that celestial energy is somehow lighter. I think maybe it's because there's a lot of practitioners out there who, particularly, I think maybe in Ireland I noticed this in particular, and probably because of the church influence, but there's a lot of places that tend to focus on angelic energy because it sounds like it's more in line with religion. You know what I mean? If you just talk about working with spirits, or even, I don't know, working with the Fae, or working with, some people work in demonic, some people work in, whatever people are working in, that's all very scary to people. It's just like, ooh, especially if someone's very religious, they'll say, stay away from that. So they say, oh, but I work with angels. The thing is, angelic energy is really, it can be as much of a sledgehammer as the other. And not in a bad way, but if you're not prepared for it, it may catch you off guard. A lot of people will write to me about their work with like Hecate, or even with Lilith, or with with Azrael. With different, I have people who will contact me and say, "Oh, I worked with this particular energy, and this, all these things happened." And I said, "Yeah, because really, when you start committing yourself to working with any kind of energy, if you're committing yourself to a change." Then things actually do start to change and shift. And we always think, especially if we feel like we're stuck, we're like, oh, good, we're going to change now and we're going to shift. The thing about the change and the shift is that change isn't the reason that people fear change, is because sometimes change can leave you unsettled. It can leave you in an unsettled place. And working with the celestial energy, I find, is ungrounding. Okay, it's not bad. I mean, there's definitely people who say that some of this stuff is just more, oh, it's like you want to believe it, or it's imagination in your head. I'm like, oh no, it's definitely not. It's something that is you can physically feel it, and it's doing something, and it's doing something you need. It's kind of like when you just make up your mind you're gonna do the spring clean, like you hate doing windows, or you hate getting under and scrubbing underneath. It's kind of like that kind of work is being done. That spring clean is really being done on your energy and on whatever else in your life maybe is not moving, or maybe attitudes you need to get rid of. And they can go, depending on how enthusiastic they are, they can go at it pretty aggressively. And with me, for some reason, when I had the Rouhani session, I remember Jennifer said I kept telling them to go at it with grace and ease and to try to make it easy. I'm like, no, they're not going to do that. They just, they're just like, okay. And then they just come right in, and it has been, and the thing is, I've talked to some other people who've had it done, and yeah, there's, like, they either get sick a couple days afterwards, or they're just like, it can either really knock your energy out, or it just makes you like so high, it can make you so high strung that you can't focus. So the real challenge there is being able to ground that energy. That's where you need the catonic element. That's why the celestial element alone is not enough. You need that element that's going to tie you back to earth, because if it's all up here, it doesn't really go anywhere. You don't actually manifest it into reality. What you're trying to do, or the change that you're trying to enact. And it sounds almost interesting because we think of when we think of energy, when we think of masculine and feminine sides of things, which Rouhani itself is actually about balancing masculine and feminine, which is another thing I found very interesting about it. and we often think of action as masculine. Okay, that's the masculine. It's the yang energy, right? If we talk about yin and yang, yin is energy of passivity, femininity, right? The moon, the receptivity. Yang is supposed to be the active, fiery, sun-centered kind of energy. But it's interesting because action really doesn't take place in that. Because yang also is connected with the celestial realm, right? As the yin is connected to the earth realm, but when you're strictly floating around the celestial realm, you're not. It's really you can't have action unless you ground it in earth, which is the feminine realm. Okay, so kind of the way in which those two forces work together, and that's why you don't. Sometimes we may be overly tilted on one side, and so we need to tilt ourselves to the other side, so to speak, and try to get some things in balance. But ultimately, it's about working with both of those energies. And when we talk about that in terms of the males and females in our lives, it would have to be, a lot of times that's a projection point of those archetypal things. So if somebody sees people in what we would think of as more traditional roles, then what they're doing is taking some of that archetypal energy and projecting it onto a person who also may biologically identify as masculine or identify as feminine. And and that's just, but again, like all projections that we have to take responsibility for, you have to recognize that's a projection. Recently, what was it I saw? I saw it in a couple of different places where there was this is commencement time at a lot of universities, and I think it's the guy who's, I forget who he is. He's on the Kansas City Chiefs, and I don't remember his name. He's not somebody I'd ever heard of before, but apparently got up and gave a commencement speech at a college to girls about how they should kind of be back in the kitchen, and how the men had to kind of man up and own their masculinity. And let's just say that didn't really go over very well. As it really shouldn't, because that to me that almost demonstrates that misunderstanding of masculine and feminine. It's the idea that because we associate the feminine, say, with motherhood or with nurturing or with that automatically that means if you're female that those are all the characteristics that you must embody. But a woman has to embody masculine characteristics as well, just as men should be embodying feminine characteristics. And good morning. So it's not a case of if you have a woman who is completely devoid of any kind of masculine characteristics, okay, if you were going to look at it that way, if a woman was going to be just completely the feminine, I see this as a trend too. There's apparently this thing on TikTok and so forth where there's girls doing the trad wife thing, and of course they're not really doing the trad wife thing, but what they're doing is they're playing it trad wife. They're actually. He said, if you were an actual traditional wife, like if you were trying to go old school homestead, you wouldn't be doing what you're doing. Because a lot of these people, first of all, are not, if they're baking bread or doing stuff around the kitchen, they're doing it as a strictly like aesthetic kind of a thing. They're not doing it, or maybe they're even doing it as a kink, who knows? But they're not doing it in the real traditional kind of way. I mean, I think about my grandmother, what my mother has told me about my great grandmother and so forth, and even my own mother. It's like no, it's a highly unglamorous job, and and it's very, very hard work. And so walking around in a little floral print dress, acting like no, you're just really. A lot of times there will be men who will like that because it's an absolute projection point for whatever they're fantasizing about and so forth. And similarly, you can have men who are like that too, where you can have men who are a projection for whatever feminine fantasies might exist. Yes, thank you. So you have someone who's a total projection point. A woman, if men say that they don't want to deal with a woman who has an identity, okay, who has an identity that she can talk about, that is, a woman can, there's almost this attitude of, as I've said, and I've talked about this a lot on Katonia, where they talk about the woman who's either attractive or smart. Like, you can't be both. And if you're both, that's somehow, like, that's wrong and that's threatening, and you can't be both. It has to be, and it's like, no, that is, and I think a lot of that comes from the fact that a lot of men in our society are taught not to embrace any aspect of the feminine in themselves. It's always just kind of like, work hard, suck it up, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, man up, right? You hear a lot of this kind of thing, and a lot of men are subject to that, and that's what they internalize, and that's what they think they have to be. If that's what their family dynamic was, then that's what they're going to want to repeat in a relationship. So it takes somebody who is like really very self-aware, or maybe somebody who astrologically has a fair amount of feminine energy in their chart, placed in the correctly, to be able to recognize that that's there. But even if they do, it may be something that they either keep hidden, and if it's something that they have been bullied for, then they may take it out as very aggressively towards females instead, like the women, and why women aren't the way that they should be. But there's an attitude almost of women are supposed to submit, or women are supposed to owe you, or something like that, and it's like, well, no, that's not. That's not how any of this works. When you are in a relationship, now equality in relationship is a hard thing to define, what it means to be equal. But basically, you have to have two people who are sort of committed to working together, to working with each other, to loving each other enough that they accept the other person as they are. Not, I only like you when you're this way, or when you look this way, or when you do this. We all have things about people we don't like, let's face it. If you live with somebody long enough, the things that endeared you to them when dating, and then once you're married to them, now they're annoying. You hear about that a lot, and people's behaviors can change, but it's really interesting. I guess marriage as a transition, and actually that wasn't really entirely where I meant to go today, but that's where my dialogue's taking me, so I'm going with it. Marriage as a transition is something that if both people are not prepared in that way, and probably the majority of people are not, the way dating tends to work is you meet somebody, you get to know them, if you like them, you might, people have different ideas about when they may want to get sexually involved, again, depending on what ages we're talking about here. But if you're talking about two adults, there's a, it could be something that happens sooner rather than later. I don't find it necessarily matters. There's a lot of people who say, oh, well, you've got to be in a relationship for X amount of time. Now, again, everybody's different. I have friends who have had situations where someone's asked them to marry them after knowing them for 3 months, and she's like, absolutely not. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that ever again. So, cultural indoctrination of gender roles. Yeah, exactly. And this is it. This is what we were talking about, the way in which the archetypal masculine and feminine, when we project that outwards, we try to put it into a living person, but it's actually more of an archetypal concept. It's something that is in the psyche of everybody, and everybody has to have both of those characteristics. To be a balanced person, as I said, women have to engender masculine characteristics. Women have to be able to set boundaries, be able to stand up for themselves, be able to take action when necessary. Should develop their intellect. All of those things should be developed. Whereas men, really, also, traditionally they're told to not show emotion, to suck it up, to do all this different stuff, and it's not, and that's what a lot of times where the imbalance is. You have women who are trying to do things in a balanced kind of a way, and you have men who are still very much imbalanced because there's still a culture that shames them for doing that. And when you see that, that's what I said. I feel like a lot of the pushback against gay rights, for instance, the pushback against trans rights, the pushback against gender fluidity and things like that. Gender fluidity, I think, is a thing. I did do a Katonia conversation with two men who, one who considered, I'm just saying men, right? Someone who was, identifies as he, but is considered to be gender fluid, and then another who would have considered to be masculine but identifies as female. And I did a podcast with the two of them, Jeffrey Jen and Alexandros, back I think it was January 2023 that I actually spoke with both of them. And it's actually, gender fluidity is a much more, it's an eye-opening concept. There's a lot more to this when you have people who are actually engaging with gender, kind of head-on in that way. And in the way that how one feels masculine or one feels feminine, like what does that mean? What does it mean to feel masculine? What is it? I think it's more than just who you're attracted to. That seems to be a component of it, maybe even a key component of it. but some people are attracted to both sexes. I mean, it's not there's not those rigid categories, and when people are looking to project those energies, they kind of decide like, well, I want to project this energy onto you, but you're not falling into that into that basket, into that slot that I've put you in based on what sexual organs you have. And it's so really it's a matter of opening up, but a lot of people don't want to do that. They want to say, well, no, if you were born with this set of organs, this is what your life path is. And that's, it's the old phrase, biology is not destiny. You can't just automatically say that, this is what a man should do or this is what a woman should do. But I think women especially have really pushed towards developing themselves. And there are men who do it too. I don't want to say that there aren't. I would just say that culturally speaking, I don't feel like that side of things has caught up, which is why you still have, I follow some of these sites like Women's Rights News and stuff, and you see some of these behaviors that men still exhibit. And I mean, we're not talking older men who are closer to my age. We're talking about men who are like in their 20s, maybe just heading into 30. So we're not necessarily talking about teenagers either. And you do have this whole, I don't know, what do they call it, that alpha male movement or something, which is really, really rather silly. I mean, it's just, it's like, if you're going to tightly embrace the idea that you need to dominate your woman, I'm like, I think this is like a misplaced kink or something. I mean, it's just not how life works. And even if you do manage to get into a relationship, all you're going to be is an abuser in that kind of relationship. And I don't know, maybe you should, stay in your parents' basement, whatever it is. I don't know. I mean, but that that mentality is not. That's not going to win you a woman. A woman's not going to look at you and go, "Ooh, wow." This isn't. I mean, I know we're related to apes, but the person who bangs their chest the loudest is not going to be, the one who everybody like flocks to mate with. So it's we don't live in that kind of a world, and that's kind of part of the things too. Is that, speaking of transition and shift, is that we are really shifting into a new paradigm. And I know, again, there's some people who believe in astrology and some don't. And good morning, JR. There's some people who believe in astrology and some don't. But really, when we talk about this Capricorn Aquarius shift, like Pluto moving from one to another. And the reason Pluto tends to be significant, even though astronomically, Pluto, there's always a debate as to whether Pluto's even a planet. It becomes, nonetheless, astrologically, Pluto represents like uncovering all the stuff that's hidden, not the stuff that's apparent, the things that we apparently think are good about something or are the benefits of a particular thing. Pluto shows you what's in shadow, what's hidden, and what's not so, maybe not so great about it. So we live in a Western society that embraces democracy, it embraces capitalism, and both of those things are generally considered to be good things. Democracy is generally considered to be good in spite of the fact that it is highly imperfect and very fragile. But the idea that you have some kind of a balance between government and people and voice should be a good thing. It's one of the things. Secularism, people who hold very, very rigid views don't like secularism because they feel that, we have to follow God's law or whatever. But strictly speaking, as it's been pointed out many times, if you're in a secular society, it means that everybody has the freedom to believe what they want. So if you want to believe very extreme religious things, you're free to do so. I mean, but you can't force other people to do it. That's the basic thing that seems to be hard for people to understand. I was at a round table. They have this thing every year called the Oxford Round Table, and I was invited. I actually still get invited every year, but it's very expensive to go, so I didn't, and I don't have a department who will pay for me to go. So I did go in 2009, and I remember, weirdly, there were a lot of evangelicals at this from America. And of course, from America, because I don't, I'm sure there are evangelical churches in the UK. I don't know that, I don't think it's anywhere near as prevalent as it is in parts of the United States. And you did have these very hardcore pastors. And I remember talking with some of these people casually. And I'm like, I've never seen people so wound tight in my entire life. But it's because they're very, people come very, very rigidly tied to certain systems. And usually, as I've said, as I've expressed in the book that I have called Death and the Maiden, where I say was the curious relationship between the fear of the feminine and the fear of death. And I usually talk about that book over on Catonia, but it does address the fact that the main factor, it seems to be, in people not being able to embrace change is fear of what that change is going to do. As I talked about before, where when you want a life shift, be careful what you ask for, because you just may get it, and things frequently don't go the way that we expect them to. So we need to kind of stay grounded and focused in where we're going with things. So culturally speaking, we have that, and also culturally speaking, economically, capitalism tends to be the thing that's privileged. And capitalism can be a great thing. I mean, it means, free enterprise. You're not bound to do a certain job or to work for certain people or do a certain thing. You could be an entrepreneur. You could do things your own way. But it's also become associated with this kind of ruthless, I'm gonna get mine and step on whoever I can. If you remember maybe you don't, but certainly I remember the 80s and the 80s where there was all of that kind of Wall Street things. Where Trump was like a superstar in terms of being considered to be somebody who was a successful businessman. I mean, we know that that's probably not really true now, but that was the idea. That was certainly the mythology then. And but there was this whole thing around wealth and greed and things like that, and that seemed to be a thing. That was the Reagan years. I mean, it became and then once we have this Pluto in Capricorn, which started in 2008. It's like when you started to see certain things unravel, the system that we have of if you're going to be a successful, good, productive member of society, you've got to work 80 hours per week for somebody and ruthlessly compete and make as much money as you can. And we're now seeing that, after when COVID slammed into us, it was like, okay, now everybody has to stay home. Now everybody can't. And for some people that meant no work. Some people were able to get unemployment. Other people were not. I mean, it was a real crisis situation for a lot of people. But even people who were still employed and were able to work from home, I was one of those who was fortunate enough to be able to do that. It was like regardless, everybody kind of got a different view on what it meant to work and what it meant to spend all of your days and all of your life hours working for a corporation or working for something. Because corporations have changed in the way that they deal with people. There was a time, like when my father was working for, I think that time it was the phone company. It was the Bell system, right? It was New Jersey Bell, because he lived in New Jersey. And when he retired in 1992, because he took an early retirement, he was in his late 50s then, and he had said, they basically, he had been there for 40 years, and he had a full pension, he had benefits, he had all this stuff. It was, now when you leave a job, if you get health benefits when you retire, I mean, that's a big to-do. I mean, that's a very rare thing these days, unless you're grandfathered into the old system in a lot of places. They moved from giving you a pension to having a 401k. Oh, you could potentially make more money this way. Yeah, but if the stock market fails, so do you. I mean, there's a lot that goes on there. And I think what's happened over the last few years as we've moving towards Pluto and Aquarius is that we're seeing how this particular energy that we think is that what it means to be successful, what it means to be an accomplished, successful human being, where now we're questioning that. And saying, well, no, maybe that's not what it's about. Maybe, and this is something I hear a lot from clients, from friends, from different people, is the idea of, because we're talking about being in relationships, that's where we started with this, but then we also talk about the idea of working and being productive. So if you have a day at home where you're not doing anything, you might feel like, oh, I'm being lazy and unproductive, right? I have to be working every minute. But therein lies the interesting thing. Sometimes to manifest stuff, you need to just maybe set your intention and then just let it happen. You need to just stand back and let the universe come in and do it. Don't feel like you have to come in and micromanage what's going on, because you are part of a larger system. That's really that feminine energy that's coming in that says, hey, you know what? Maybe I don't have to, we think there's something great about, I slogged through a 14-hour day and, I'm really accomplished. And it's like, okay, well, maybe you are. I mean, I don't want to slag anybody who's doing that, but it's because it's not a bad thing, but is it necessary? And is it good for your health? We have to consider what's going to appropriately ground us and what's going to appropriately put us in a space where you can have that work-life balance, where you can have quality of life. But making the shift, people who have like really absolutely had it up to here with the work, with the 9-to-5 world, and say, that's it, I'm out. And I'm speaking from personal experience, but I also know this to be the experience of other people. When you initially make that transition, it is terrifying, because you feel like, oh my God, it's like I've quit my job and now I can just, and you feel like you're like staying at home and being lazy or something. You're not. Or you feel like I have to succeed in everything by tomorrow or else. And we don't give ourselves the time to do things, to build. You do the work, but you do the work more at your own pace. You do it more in a way that's meaningful to you. You develop new routines. And it can be very, very hard to break out of that mindset, because we are still in that capitalistic mindset that says, no, I have to be working hard every minute. If people are trying to start new ventures and things, sometimes a lot of people are in the human design system, which I do human design readings for people, which it talks a lot. It kind of combines astrology, I Ching, Kabbalah, like a bunch of different things. But what it does is it basically gives you a map of your energetic system, okay, and how you are energetically. And what I find with human design is a lot of people, probably the majority of human beings, fall into what they call the generator category, or the manifesting generator category. And manifesting generators are little worker bees. They want to work. They like to do things. But usually, there's usually a strategy for success for each human design type. And the strategy for the generator is wait for the invitation. So a lot of times I'll hear people who say like, well, if you want to be successful, you got to go out and make 20 cold calls of this per day. And somebody's like, no, I don't want to do that. I don't. And the thing is, if they push themselves to do it, and then it doesn't really go anywhere, because that's not really, it's the idea that you've got to keep forcing things. I remember I had a friend once who was in Britain who was not working, and that person had, those of you who are in Britain, if you've ever had to be on benefits, there's because of being out of work, like if you've been laid off or whatever like that from a job, then it becomes like, well, you've got to go to job center every day, and you've got to apply for X number of jobs every day to show that you are. And what this person had told me was, they said, I'm applying for all these jobs that are worthless. And then they were putting people in offices just to have them, like there were employers who were saying, the government was paying them to employ people for a day. And this person said it was the most disheartening thing, because literally you were just sitting around an office doing nothing. They weren't employing you. They weren't giving you any skills. And it was just like they were just collecting money from the government to say, oh yeah, I babysat these people for a day. Because, God forbid you be at home. It's like, no, you have to be doing something all the time. And and the thing is, as this person pointed out to me, they said, yeah, as soon as they were able to get a couple days off from job searching, that's when the invitation actually came in, when they stopped doing things. Okay? So sometimes you just need to kind of, let things marinate, like there's not necessarily a need to be doing all the time. So that's kind of a revolutionary idea, I think, that's coming up with this new thing, is just that, no, people find new ways of working in a system where machines may be starting to do a lot more of what our, day-to-day jobs are. Then I'm like, okay, then we need to think about a whole new economic system and a whole new way of working. But I mean, that's probably very forward thinking for the moment, but especially since we're still on the cusp. People have talked about the idea of things like universal basic income and stuff like that. But when you have a society that says, absolutely not, that's taking advantage, and it's like, well, no, it isn't. There's different ways of working, and there's no reason why you have to break your back every day. I don't think that's what life is meant to be, unless, or what mythology are you living under that tells you that that's the way life has to be. Usually a mythology that somehow that you are sinful and need to repent for something. So I need to be under the yoke all the time, to pay for something. I don't know what, or even some ideas about karma are like that as well. The idea that I have to pay my debt somehow. And it's like, maybe it's not quite like that. So let's do our reading for today. Okay, our center card again was what's interesting. We had this one from yesterday. We had the dream. The dream is the idea of being rescued by somebody. Okay, and so yeah, there's I think this might go back to originally what I was talking about in this about marriage, in the way that marriage sometimes, I think the masculine feminine problem may come in because people think that one or the other partner is going to save them from something. Okay, that you're going to be swept off your feet, and it can go either way. In my marriage, my husband more or less said to me that he expected that I was just going to fix everything, because he looked at me and was like, oh, he thought I was beautiful, he thought I was intelligent, and he's like, oh, good, me, I'm not, I just need to sit around because I'm easily stressed. So you can work 3 jobs and manage the house and everything, and also be like totally in love with me all the time. And if you're failing at any of that, I'll be sure to let you know that you're not doing your job. It was that kind of a thing. And I was, after a while, people do get angry about that after a while, and I know I did. That's what I was telling my sister the other day. I said, I took karate for a number of years. I said, I think I just needed to punch something, because it was just, before I'd gotten divorced, it was just like, I'm not. There's this attitude of somebody's coming in to save you, and I mean the reverse can happen too. The reverse also happens, where you see a man and you think, oh, that man is everything, and or whoever you're attracted to, whatever gender, sex, or you're attracted to. People look at a person and project their soul image, as I've talked about before, and then they say, oh, that person's going to be my knight in shining armor. And this is saying ultimately happiness comes from within. The inner feeling of which we are unaware here is the receptivity. Okay, and we were talking about this with feminine energy, right? So there's this influx of feminine energy that's both catonic, as I said earlier, so it's something that can ground you, but it's also something that's open to receiving, and not trying to play by these kind of old scripts, not playing by a script that says, well, no, this is the only way to think about this thing. Receptivity allows you to be open to what's new. And the external feeling of which we're aware is, my favorite card here, the Burden card. Now, interestingly, this is the 6 of Swords. I like the 6 of Swords because it has to do with moving overseas, like in traditional decks. And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what I want to do. But the burden in this deck is, like I said, you see this person, this very exhausted-looking person, and this character on their back, who we're not really sure if the character is male or female, but just kind of, cracking the whip, you get on. But this is what this represents, is the expectations of what we think of as society or other people. If I do this, what are these people going to think? What's my family going to think? What's, are people going to look at me as lazy or shiftless, or are they going to look at me, or what's my social expectation in a relationship? What's my social expectation? And this is saying drop all of that. How the meaning in the book of this card is, how good would it feel to not have these characters on your back? Okay, easier said than done, but interesting. Okay, so. The advice card here is the Ace of Swords. It's the consciousness card. Buddha consciousness here, right? The consciousness of the fact that this is saying, you've been open to receiving, you're intuitive, and you have clarity. Now, this is mental clarity, okay? Aces have to do with the intellect. So in other words, I think what it's saying is that whoever needs to hear this particular message is, you are seeing things clearly. You are not delusional. The fact that you are engaged in this receptive energy does not mean that you are, that you're somehow, have your head in the clouds or a dreamer. And that actually might be why this is coming up, because there may be somebody here who actually thinks like, oh, I'm not doing this right. I'm expecting that I'm waiting for, okay. Waiting for an opportunity and being rescued are two different things. It's not the same thing. I think a lot of times people think that giving something space to grow is the same as expecting that somebody's going to save them. But I don't think that's what's going on here. I think it's just like, no, you're allowing things to come in. Yep. And that's what's happening here. That's not being irresponsible. That's understanding the fundamental way that things work. That's incorporating the feminine in a meaningful way into what we're doing. And yeah, our outcome here is the healing card. Okay, and this is the King of Cups card. Okay, healing means that this is it's interesting summation. Interesting the way that the topic of today, which those of you who didn't get to join me earlier, we kind of moved from grounding to masculine and feminine to like marriage relationships to jobs and economic systems. Kind of run all over the map today, but this is the way my mind works in the morning. And so ultimately with the healing card, there's the idea of healing those. And I feel like it's a matter of, certainly when we're healing, any parts of us that are wounded or split or cut apart, there's a need to kind of bring that energy back together. So when I see the healing card here, I feel like it's saying, what's going on right now, whatever you might be doing, if you have moved away from something that you feel has been toxic to your energy, okay, and you're saying, okay, I need a break, I need some time, I need a rest, I need to wait for things to just come to me. This is saying, yeah, you're doing the right thing. You're clear on what it is you need to do. And there was somebody I can't remember if this had to do with a client or something recently, but it was a situation where I felt like somebody needed to get out of a job situation, and they couldn't negotiate being in a situation where maybe they were reliant on their husband, or they were, and I kind of had to say, well, it sometimes, that's the other thing too, support. The feminine versus masculine, one of the things we talk about is individual versus collective. And I talk about this in the intro to my book, as I say, when you're in the collective is feminine, individual is masculine. When we try to have this push towards me as an individual, me, my ego, my identity, my success, what I identify with, that's a very masculine thing. That's that heroic impulse. Like mythologically, that's the hero's journey. I'm going through all my stuff and all my trials to become the individual. But it's also about getting that relationship to the feminine and recognizing the collective, recognizing that you're part of the system, recognizing that there are people out there who will help you and will work with you. And that's the other part of the capitalistic problem, because it's so individualistic. It makes us say, I can't ask anybody else for help. I'm going to burden somebody else by asking them for help. And that's not always true. Sometimes there's people who are more than willing, or who are on board with you and more than willing to help. And as I pointed out, I think in this particular case, it's like the fact that you have somebody there. In this case, if you have a spouse, that person should be there to help you. Because this was a case of somebody who's very, very driven to do things. And it's like, look, you're not somebody who's like, okay, I'm quitting now, and now you're going to support me for the rest of my life, and I'm going to do nothing. It's like you need some time to regroup. But we feel very, very guilty about having time to regroup. And that's, but you need that. And, we act like leisure time is something that's just for that. Well, if you're in America, certainly you only get 2 weeks holiday. If you're in Europe, you get 6 weeks usually, which is definitely more in line with the way things should be. But there's, you have this, it's like, and you're on the vacation, and that's almost like, it almost reminds me of like with kids, where I remember when people started having play dates for their kids. It was like, well, I've made a play date with so-and-so down the street. And I remember when I would have friends with kids and stuff who would tell me about that, and I'm like, a play date? What the heck's a play date? I mean, when I was a kid, we just ran outside, and just whoever was there, you just like went and hung out with. And like, hey, let's go into the woods today. Let's go do this. Let's go ride our bikes. It wasn't like you necessarily made a plan. You just showed up, you knocked on the door. It's like, hey, can so-and-so come out and play? I mean, there's this rigidity to, okay, leisure time is only compacted in this area. And then of course you go on a holiday, and then it's like, oh, okay, now I have to make sure that I accomplish these things on my holiday. We never kind of get out of that mode. We don't just say, yeah, you know what, maybe it would be good to just sit around on a beach and enjoy something. I don't mind sitting on the beach actually, but it's not usually my first choice of thing. Like I said, I prefer my holidays in the UK and places like that. Or parts of Ireland, places that I think, I go visit megalithic sites when I go on holiday. But again, I don't necessarily go that to do anything. I just go to, to take a walk, to be in nature, to connect, to maybe to sit around, to sit in the pub, to have a pint. It's not about having to do a lot of stuff. Ooh, have I seen all of these sites? It's like, I don't know, I just have a wander. There's that old word, serendipity. Okay, when we talk about something coming across something by serendipity, I think it comes from serendripa or something like that. Basically, it had to do with some kind of a story that had to do with Sri Lanka, and it was whatever under its old name, and it was the idea of this story about people kind of just falling into all of these adventures in this particular thing, and then it ended up morphing into the word serendipity, and I'm not sure I'm remembering. I thought it was serendipity, but I can't remember exactly what the original word was. But yeah, it just has to do with this idea of kind of coming across things by happy accident. You know, you fall into things rather than having to have, back to rigid control and planning. So healing, I think, here has to do with the way in which when we finally break the stranglehold of having to have control of everything and worrying about everything, the way in which now we can heal, in which things can flow, and in which life will happen to us more naturally, because I think that's what happens. Things happen naturally rather than us always trying to force things all the time. And again, there's times when we need to take action, and there's times when we don't. But I think we feel like we need to be taking action all the time. And that, I think, is a very Capricornian thing. And so now this Aquarian age, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of concerns about AI and stuff. My concerns about it are you don't want it to replace human creativity. Sometimes AI is good for brainstorming and for different things. If you're going to use something like ChatGPT or something like that. Sometimes if I just need an idea, I might pop something in there. But to have it like write your papers and write your books and stuff, like I would object to that personally, because it's not. That's not the thing you want to replace. That's the thing you want to make time for. Is what do you have to offer? What talents do you have to offer? Let AI handle all the stuff. All the proverbial ditch digging, right? Let AI handle that, because you should just be able to. The idea of having all of these things is that you should have more time, more leisure time. But technology has never given us more leisure time. It makes us feel like we have to work harder for some reason. And that never really was the original intention of it. The idea was that you have all these labor-saving devices. That's literally what they're called. They're meant to save you, save labor, save money, save all kinds of things. And then it's kind of like, okay, so what do humans do now? I mean, humans need to rethink the way that they're going to do stuff. So, anyway, I'm almost 7. I'm looking at the 12 on my thing, and so I'm saying 12. We have transformation on the bottom. So we're just talking about change and shift. So that will be it for me today. I want to thank you guys so much for joining me. I really appreciate everybody who pops in at this rather early hour. Well, again, depends on where you are. In the U.S., it's on the East Coast, it's early hour. Certainly, if you're on the West Coast, it's an early hour right now. But yeah, just wanted to just have a little talk. I'm a little bit of a ramble this morning, but I woke up kind of, like I said, in this kind of state of mind, and so I don't know. I think we've ended up somewhere that's reasonably sensible. So anyway, I hope this reading helps you for today. I hope the things we talked about today are interesting and useful. If you didn't see the whole thing, the whole reel will be saved on Instagram. You can watch it on my profile page, or I will also be uploading it to YouTube this morning. So you can watch it at youtube.com/@liminaltarot5130 if you want to watch it there. You are welcome, and thank you guys so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Have a wonderful weekend, though I will be here tomorrow, and we'll see you in the next time.